Again, thank you everybody for coming to another MAIC webinar. We're super excited to have with us today Tom Kiffney from the University of Maine. He's a graduate student working on shellfish, aquaculture, and ecophysiology. And he's going to be talking with us today about some really cool online resources that are available for people who are interested in farming species along the coast of Maine. So I'm gonna let Tom take it away, but just before I do that, please ask your questions in the chat, and he'll say that again too. But this is a great presentation to have people asking throughout, so put them in the Q&A function as we go along, and that will really help make this even more engaging. So thank you. On to you, Tom.
Thanks, Maya. Hello, everybody. My name is Tom, and I am, sorry, let me just get up my presentation. I thought it was loaded. Here we go. All right, so my name, can everyone see my screen right now? Is it full screen?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, so my name is Tom Kiffney. I'm a PhD student at the Darling Marine Center. So this is UMaine's marine lab on the Damascus River. And so I'm giving a little presentation today on some online data sources that we have found throughout the years that are helpful for aquaculture site selection. So this is primarily for, shellfish, but there can also be stuff in here that is useful for seaweed and other species as well. And so just as a little overview, I'm going to give a short introduction on the Brady Lab and sort of our experimental farm where we do a lot of our work. And then I'm going to go over some general tools that are used for, just looking around different areas, seeing some existing uses and some things that we should note when we're actually looking to site a farm, as well as some ways to work with those tools to combine some of those data sources, which is pretty neat. On some data on physical oceanography, so ways to look for, predictions and historical records of winds and waves and such. And then I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about some ways to get data that is really important for growth. So we're going to, sorry, I just saw the chat pop up, but I'm not going to monitor that right now. So data that's important for growth. So, for shellfish, that would be food, as in chlorophyll or proxies for, the phytoplankton that's out in the water, and then turbidity as well, which can be a measure of food. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then temperature, which is important for all species that we culture in Maine. And so I've given this talk a few times, so I don't know if anyone here was in Aquaculture in Shared Waters or at the Fisherman's Forum or some of Hurricane Island's talks, but there has been some stuff added. So if you start to see things that you recognize, there are some new stuff in this presentation since then. And again, this is also a sort of a living document. So as I present this, people often tell me about tools that they've found useful. And that gets added. So if anyone at the end, I'll have my email up. If there's anything that you use, especially for, forecasting wind or waves at your sites, that would be really great. Just send me an email and we'd love to include that as well. So just a little bit about the Brady Lab, if people are new to Maine or the aquaculture industry. So we are, I'm a graduate student under Damian Brady down at the Darling Marine Center. And so this is where we are located, about halfway down the Damascus River. And a lot of our aquaculture work that we do, we rely on the Darling Marine Center's experimental farm. And this is a little screenshot from one of the tools that I'm going to show later. But these little green boxes is our lease in the Damascus River. We have our larger subtidal lease right near this point. And then we actually have two intertidal tracks as well. We have sort of a shallow subtidal site in between these two piers, and then a truly intertidal site tucked up into this cove here, which is really great for testing different experiments. And so we grow a variety of species. We grow oysters, scallops, and kelp, and as well as experimenting with a few other things such as razor clams lately, which is pretty neat. And so some of the data that I'm going to be showing is generated from this farm site. So I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of context about some of the where some of the data is coming from. So on to just a little bit of short introduction about what can make site selection not necessarily difficult, but sometimes a little challenging in Maine. So many of you recognize the coastline here. You can see how jagged and convoluted it is. We got Casco Bay down this left-hand side. We've got the mid-coast region with these long, narrow estuaries, Penobscot Bay, and then the down east region as well. And so I forget the exact numbers, but I think, if you draw a straight line across the coastline, it's about, 3,500 miles, if you draw a straight line, it's only about 260 miles. But if you actually trace that shoreline and these islands, it goes up to about 3,000 miles, which is really showcases how convoluted this coast is. And all these bays and estuaries, they vary in how much they're connected to the open ocean, the depth, and the residency time of the water. And so this can lead to a wide range of variables that are important to aquaculture species growth, as well as different uses that people have for them. And so just a little bit, a very 3,000-foot view of some of these environmental variables. So we have here on the left is just a figure showing the general currents, ocean currents in the Gulf of Maine. And so on the right, we have a monthly satellite image of sea surface temperature with cooler temperatures in the blue and green and warmer temperatures in the red. And this is from 2012 in the month of July. And so it kind of showcases what we see from some of these currents. So in the Gulf of Maine, we have this cold Arctic water that comes in around the tip of Nova Scotia. It comes along the bottom into the Bay of Fundy up here, and then it upwells. And you can actually see that in this image right here, this cooler portion of water is that colder water upwelling. It then flows along the coast of Maine in the eastern Maine coastal current, which you can see here. And as it goes, it warms until it hits about Penobscot Bay, where it actually curves out into the Gulf of Maine. And you can see that in the image as well. And then there's also the western Maine coastal current, which goes down along Casco Bay and the rest of the mid-coast. And this little barrier here, that varies from year to year, but it kind of splits the coast of Maine into two sections. You got your mid-coast and southern Maine, which is a little bit warmer. And then you have, your Penobscot and Down East Bay, which has more connection to that colder water. And then this image is from a very high resolution satellite image. So this is zooming in onto just one estuary, the Sheepscot River estuary, which is quite interesting. It's in that mid-coast region. This is from one satellite image, very high resolution from August 23rd, right in the middle of the summer. And you can see that on a large scale, there's definitely changes in the Gulf of Maine. But even when you look inside these estuaries, you can see there's a wide range of temperatures. So the Sheepscot has a wide mouth to it, and it's quite deep. So that main channel all the way up almost to the head of the estuary stays quite cold even through the summer. It's down around 16 to 17 degrees Celsius all the way through that river. But then you see these little offshoots and little other sections of the estuary that when there's constrictions or shallowness, you can see some of these areas warm up. And I just like this contrast where even though these bays are quite close to each other, there's a huge range of temperatures where down in this area, it gets up to about 20 to 22 degrees in the summer, which is great for oysters. And I think there actually is even a oyster farm or two located down in there. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this high resolution satellite data for temperature later on. And so this is one of the things if people want to engage a little bit, if you have a site that you're curious about, we're going to walk through how to download some of this temperature data and look at it and clean it up a little bit to get an idea of a seasonal range of these inshore areas. So if anyone wants to throw in a chat about an area, just give like a short description or a feature on land that we can look up and get close to it. That'd be pretty great. If not, I have plenty of stuff preloaded that we can check out as well. And so beyond temperature, there's a wide range of environmental variables as well. These are some images, also high resolution satellite images. On the left, we have an average of April total suspended solids, so everything that is just sitting in the water. That includes phytoplankton, dirt, anything else that is just kind of suspended in that water. And on the right, we have an average of images from May, and these are from 2016 to 2020. And everyone knows what happens in Maine. In the summer, we have lots of rain, and you can see all of this stuff is getting washed into the ocean. So right here, where we see this large plume, that's the Kennebec River, which has one of the larger watersheds in Maine. So all of that water is draining into the Kennebec, and we can see that there is this large plume of sediment or just other solids being washed down into the bay. Whereas in the Damariscotta, which has a much smaller watershed, we don't really see a huge difference between the April and May images. So that's just a little quick introduction there. And then so other things that can make site selection difficult is that we also share this water with others. And so Emily gave a great talk in the last seminar about social license, but when we're siting our farms, we want to be aware of other things that are existing and people that use the space. So, whether that's protected species or, other Mainers who are recreating, sailboats or wild harvesting and commercial fishing. It's always good to keep those into account. So the next part of the talk is basically going to be me switching in between a little slide that shows an overview of the data sources I'm going to talk about. I'm then going to switch to those data sources and play around with them a little bit and show some of the tools. In each of these, I added a QR code. So if you scan this, it'll take you to the website on your phone. Some of the data portals don't load very well on phones. So there's also these links as well. And these slides will be shared, I'm sure. So if you need to get a hold of these too, you can also just email them at the end, and I'd be happy to share this information with you. So the first one is sort of great for basic data. This is my go-to data portal for pretty much everything aquaculture. So I'm going to stop sharing my presentation real quick, and we're going to go to this link. So many of you are probably pretty familiar with the Maine DMR Aquaculture Map. It's sort of a GIS tool where you can point and click and look at a bunch of things. I'm going to make this full screen, and there's just a few things I want to show with this.
Also, Tom, just so you know, we do have 2 sites that have come up. So whenever you need them, I can tell you what they are.
Awesome, great. I think that's the last thing in the slideshow, so that's exciting. Cool. And also, I want to make sure everyone knows if you have a question about a tool that I'm talking about, please don't hesitate to ask, and happy to interrupt so we can chat about it while I actually have the tool up. So this is the Maine DMR Aquaculture Map. You can it covers the whole coast of Maine. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the layers that they have on there. So if you scroll in, we're going to go to the Darling Marine Center. Okay, so this is our lease that I showed before. So this map, the base layer is nautical charts. So you have the depths of the water columns. And so this is where our lab is located, and this is our lease. And there's a few things on here. If you click up on the right-hand corner, there's a legend. So this will tell you what layers you have loaded. So it'll tell you the information that's actually being shown on the map right now. So these are the active and renewed leases. And then the dots are shown for LPAs. So we have a couple of LPAs across the river as well that have popped up. So if you actually click on these leases, you can get information about what you're permitted to grow in the area. And it's a great way to scroll around and see, if you're interested in growing something in an area, to see what people are growing, to see if, your species could also match that location. And if you're curious, there's also links in here. I'm not going to click on it, but it will actually take you to the lease decisions. So some of these decisions have, other stipulations on them as well, things that they have to be aware of while they operate. So it's great to, if you're interested in an area, scroll around, click on some of these lease decisions, see if there's any conditions that were placed on the lease, which is a pretty useful tool. So that's what is loaded right now. We only have the leases and those shape files that are defining where they are. But if you want to add something else to this map, you can click on this next button over here, where it will show you the active layers. So right now we have the lease applications under review, the LPAs, and the active pending aquaculture leases. So if you scroll down, there's a whole bunch of stuff that is relevant to siting farms that you can include. There's a few on here that we should check out. I think one of the most important ones in here too is in that lease application, you have to show if you are near any eelgrass. And so there's a few different layers here. They have done surveys of eelgrass in the past. Some are more recent than others. So we have an example of an eelgrass survey from 2022 in Casco Bay only. But if we click on the 1997 link, we kind of see where these new features have popped up. And you can go back to the legend to see what they look like. So this is basically saying, what is the density of this eelgrass? And there's 2 eelgrass layers. Another survey was done in 2022, so we can load that. And so it's also important to note that, if we look at this is, an online tool. This data was collected and loaded, but things change. So if we scroll in, currently our lease does border on what looks like some eelgrass habitat. However, by the time this lease was actually permitted, I think in 2013 or 14, and the site visit was conducted, there was no more eelgrass in these sites. So while this tool can give you an idea of where to look, it's not an end all, and it's always great to actually go out to your site and check these things. These tools mostly point you in a place to look. And that's going to be a theme throughout the talk, is show you the tool and then say, you should always check this. So some other layers that might be interesting, that I found interesting, is the low tide images. So you can go to here, might take a second to load. Oh, that's the South Coast. There we go. So that's great if you're wondering, are any of my areas actually exposed on low tide, going in between the low tide image and the nautical chart to see, where that lines up is super helpful. There are a bunch of other things that are also used on here. Over in this right-hand corner, this is one of my favorite things, is the coordinate conversion, going in between different kinds of coordinates. Sometimes when you look up data in other sections or other sites, it's in a different format. So if you click on this little marker button on the right and click anywhere, it'll give you the input, and then it'll give you all the variations of GPS locations, which I find incredibly useful. So that's everything on the right. You can load a couple of other images, tidal and waterfowl, wading bird habitat, things to be aware of when you're actually siting that farm. There are also tools on this right-hand side over here that are very useful. One that I use a whole lot is the measurement tool. So you can click on this. There's a couple options. If you want to just know a GPS location, you can click on any point. This is great for if you're trying to locate where, the corners of your lease are, if you're drawing those maps for the application. You can also measure distance, which is great if you need to find out if your proposed lease is within 1,000 feet of a riparian landowner. And you can also get the square footage of a proposed lease as well. So you can draw any sort of polygon shape that you want, double click to end it, and it will give you the square feet. You can change this to meters, which is very helpful. I don't think anyone is getting a lease that large right in the middle of the channel. And there are other options under draw. So if you are actually, want to see if something is exact. So say you need to put 1,000-foot buffer around something, you can click here, draw your 1,000 feet. We're just going to get close. Ooh. Double click it to end it. Go to draw. select the buffer, the circle here. And now you can create a circle with, the exact radius as well. So I guess 500 feet would have been the right radius because you double that and now you have your 1,000-foot buffer on either side. So that's pretty neat. You can also print this. Unfortunately, there's no way to save and go back to a map that you have been adding to. But you can also print what you have done so far, which is really nice. And so I'm going to move on to some other data products right now, but I wanted to pause real quick if there's any questions that have popped up. So I'm going to keep moving, but feel free to interrupt me if anything has come up. So the next one, I'm going to go back to my slides, is some more basic data. And so while there is a bunch of data already loaded into the Maine Aquaculture Map that is relevant, there's also other sources of this data as well. And so another one that's great is the Maine Office of GIS, has a whole library of catalogs of layers that can be viewed. And then I'm also going to go over how we can actually add those to the DMR map, which is pretty great. So I'm going to close this. So this is the Maine Office of GIS. If you go through, they have a lot of these layers have already been put into the map. So we have the aquaculture leases, the LPA health zones, limited purchase aquaculture sites, P90 scores. These are the bacterial scores that are used to open and close shellfish harvesting areas. But some of this data that's not under the farming and aquaculture tab is quite interesting. They have the eelgrass layers, but there's also seabird nesting sites, special habitats of concern. And so when you're in these tools, you can also open them up in their own viewer that they have. And it will take you to a similar data portal where you can scroll in and look at different areas along the coast. And you can click on these. So, a habitat of special concern for the great blue heron. That might not be as relevant for siting aquaculture leases. But as you scroll down, I listed some ones that I think are interesting. They have, let's go to the eelgrass real quick. One thing that they have that I think is interesting is the eelgrass distribution change. So how I mentioned that there is no eelgrass at the DMC site anymore. This has combined those 2010 surveys and the ones finished in 1997. So if you scroll in, you can actually look at how these areas are changing. So there's a loss of extent in this area of about 42 acres, which is quite, you can see the general trends. Some are increasing, some are decreasing. So that's a way to get an idea of, what is happening with the eelgrass in your area. So scrolling down, I just want to show how to actually, download and use some of this information if you don't want to just look at it on this. If we go to the main boat launches, say you are looking at a site on the aquaculture map and you want to just kind of see how far away from a boat launch, maybe you don't have a mooring and you have to put a skiff in to get to your farm. I want to see, what your options are. You can click on the layer and view it, or you can download it. So there's a few other options to download, either as a KML, which is great for loading into Google Earth, if anyone has that on their computer, or a shapefile, which is great for loading into the aquaculture map. So what I've already done is I've already downloaded this shapefile of Maine boat launches. If you click on it here, you can see where they all are located around the state. But I already have these downloaded. So I'm going to go back to the Maine Aquaculture Map. I'm going to clear some of our drawings. can zoom out a little bit. So when you download a layer, you go over to this add data section on the left hand of these 5 icons over here. And you can search images within here as well, load them directly from the website. But I find it's just easier to actually download it from the Maine Office of GIS and click on file here. And you can see all the different versions, the KML file that was often there, a CSV file or a shape file. And you just basically, after you download it, go into the MAIC software seminar. It's going to download as a zipped folder, and you want to leave it right like that. You select it and open, and that data will now be loaded into the aquaculture map. So now if you scroll in, oh, you now have an idea of where some of these public boat launches exist. There's other ways to also put data into this map. Maybe you went out to your site and wanted to check, if there's any moorings nearby or what those are going to be like. So for example, the DMC actually has a small mooring field where we moor some of our research vessels out here. I have some data. You can go out with a kayak and your phone or a GPS unit and collect some pins of where you observe actual moorings. And you can load these into a CSV file or other kind of Excel file. CSV is the easiest that I found, and the format kind of matters. So I'm just going to give you guys a quick look of what it looks like. So you want your first column to be named latitude, lat, your second column to be lon, and then you actually just want to put those values of your coordinates in there as well. And then when you go to the main DMR map, you hit this button all the way on the right called Geo Lookup. And now you can select that CSV where you listed out the moorings that you saw near your site. You can open that up. So now you've loaded these moorings into this data sheet, which is pretty interesting. And say, you know the estimated depth, and there's usually like a 3-to-1, a 4-to-1 scope for actually that mooring to swing. So now you can go back to your circle and you can put a little buffer around here to make sure that your leases aren't near any moorings that might interact with your farm, which I think is pretty cool. Okay, I'm going to head back to the slides and go on to some other data. So this is not in the Maine Office of GIS. It's basic data, but it's something that is asked on the lease application. So this is just data on bald eagles. So you have to list if you're near an eagle nest, I believe. So if you go over here, got these loaded already. So this is a separate website from the Maine Office of GIS. It's just ArcGIS Hub. So you can scroll down through here. And these are basically aerial surveys of bald eagles. Again, this is done from planes, and birds build and abandon new nests, so it's always good to check your own on your site. So you can also download, you can view this data on here, or you could download it yourself, combine it with the boat launch and find out what boat launches are close enough to go look at an eagle nest. So it'll tell you where if there is birds present, is it a breeding pair, or if it has been abandoned. Okay, so I'm gonna start going a little bit faster. I see that it's already 12:30, and the interesting data that I want to get to at the end can take a little bit to look at. But I want to pause again if there's any questions that have come up. Okay, I'm going to keep going. So the next one is the Northeast Ocean Data Portal. This is really great. It has a lot of layers that I've already talked about. I'm going to move over to it here. once you open this up, it's going to have a lot of information that is already present. Already present in the Maine Aquaculture Map. But it has a few things that are different that I really like to look at. And the main one here is marine transportation. So we're going to zoom in a little bit. Boston. And so there's navigation layers, but commercial traffic is one. So this is data layers on routes and density of marine vessels. So this is all the counts that have been layered over here. And so a lot of these are taken from VMS, basically required monitoring of larger fishing boats or other passenger ferries and such. And so these give you, it's not an end all of like who is traveling in your area, but it is a good resource to look at if there are any very dense areas that you probably don't want to site your farm too close to. Another interesting one is they actually have counts of sailing vessels and the paths that they normally take. This is done through surveys where they actually go out and ask people to plot their courses, and they take a subset of those and they create these maps. So again, it doesn't replace actually going out to your site and seeing who is using it, in the spring, in the summer, and in the winter if people are fishing around you. Because again, inshore lobstermen are not required to have VMS, so they're not included in that commercial traffic. And of course, people are sailing in areas where maybe they weren't reached by the survey or didn't make it into the subsample. So this just gives you an idea, but it's a pretty interesting tool to look at. Moving on, we're going to get into some of the environmental data, such as the physical oceanography of wind and waves and such. And so this next tool is NECOF's, the Northeast Coastal Ocean Forecast System. There are some great parts about this and some not so great parts. I'm going to open it up real quick and show you a little bit of the data that is included in here. And so one reason why I love this site is because it is one of the only ways I found to get an idea of salinity. And so salinity is pretty important if you're growing a species such as sea scallops, which are very intolerant of low salinity. Anything below about 25 PSU here can be taxing on them. But it's also a good idea of, what is the freshwater input in your area. And so this is also, I want to point out, a model. So it's not actually directly measured data. It's a model that uses precipitation, tides, wind stress, and a bunch of other gauged rivers to estimate what is going to be the conditions. And so if you want to look at the salinity, you're going to want to go to the Northeast FVCOM model up here. You can click on the date. And so since this is a forecasting system, it's going to start with the day that we have, and it's only going to give you 4 or 5 days out in advance. So it's not something that you can scroll through and look at historic predicted salinities or wave heights or anything. But if you check it regularly, you can get an idea of, what are the generic salinity conditions at my site. It does other here. So if we want to go through, you can check it on a day that maybe a very large storm is going to roll through Maine, such as tomorrow. So if you look at the 17th, you can see where this large salinity plume, there's going to be probably a lot more runoff coming out of the Kennebec. You can see that there's lower salinity has moved down the river, but it doesn't really give you very high resolution data. There's areas along here in Casco Bay that are going to experience drops in salinity that aren't going to be recorded on here. It can give you other aspects. So I just went to, instead of waiting for it to load, we just went to the Northeast Wave Simulator. So this is also a forecasting tool. So it's only going to give you 4 or 5 days out. But it's pretty interesting to look at, what are the waves doing? You can also check out what it's going to be like tomorrow. And so much stronger. So again, it doesn't give you very high resolution data on the coast, but it will tell you a little bit about what's going offshore and what might be coming the way. So it's a good thing to check in regularly to look at this. It does other things such as water velocity. So I'm going to scroll out a little bit. So you can look at here, these barbs, it can be a little hard to tell, but up in here, there's a legend. So 1 meter per second is this barb right here. And the larger the area, the faster the water. It's also colored. So red is fast moving water and blue, not so much. So this will give you an idea of current speeds in certain areas. And again, this is modeled so you can change the date and time that you're looking at as well. You can see if after the storm, there's going to be much more freshwater output. And so after showing this modeling tool, I also like to go back. This is something I saw from Chris Davis when he was giving his data sources and site selection talk in aquaculture and shared waters. So while these models and these tools are great to get an idea of information at a site, it's always great to go out and check with your own stuff. And so I always like to point out that salinity can be checked directly, with a hydrometer that you can get for maintaining fish tanks. Saltwater fish tanks. And so it's not going to be, the most accurate tool, but it will give you a good range. Are you in the 15 to 20 zone that can be stressful for scallops or indicate large freshwater input, or are you in, oceanic water up around, 32. Another option that's slightly more expensive, coming in at $18, is a salinity refractometer, which allows you to look through and actually get a more accurate idea of what the salinity is. And then current speed and other water velocity measurements can be got with a lemon or an orange, something that's neutrally buoyant, and you can see really easily in the water. If you know how long your boat is, and you put it in at one end and time how long it takes to go past your boat, you now have a distance and a time, and you can calculate the water flow. So going out and actually checking these water flows and these sites that you're curious about are super important. So moving along, the next data portal I've added since last time, and this one I'm really excited about. This is Hui Hab Hub. So it's all the information that you could possibly want on harmful algal blooms in the Gulf of Maine, which is really quite incredible. I'm going to close some of these tabs to get stuff moving a little faster. So this is the interface for Hui Hab Hub. So on the right here, we have different species of potentially toxic or harmful algal blooms. So Alexandrium catenella, this is the main dinoflagellate that causes PSP closures, paralytic shellfish poisoning. Dinophyces, this causes diuretic shellfish poisoning, so not as deadly as Alexandrium, but definitely uncomfortable. Two species of that. Carenia causes fish gills. Mesodinium, I'm not quite exactly sure what this is, but I believe it's a non-toxic, but high biomass HAB. So if it blooms really large, it can clog gills of animals or other things. And then Pseudonychia, which is another important one. This causes amnesic shellfish poisoning. So it produces domoic acid, which is also quite dangerous. So you can turn these on and off, and you'll see some of this information start to disappear. But the first thing that I wanted to show was these locations. So we have one up in Bar Harbor and one in Harpswell. These are locations of IFCBs. So these are automatic data processing. They basically identify phytoplankton. And so I'm actually running out of time, so I'm going to skip this. But the other thing that I want to point out that's really great is if you select Alexandrium, you can scroll in. And when you select these areas, it'll give you a time series of shellfish toxicity in that area. This is from DMR's weekly sampling. You can control the date here. So you can look at from January to December, and you can go as far back as 1990, which is pretty incredible. If you close that, you can now see a history of toxicity. And so these sites are sampled regularly, but they're not always the same sites. So it's important if you're growing in an area to check multiple locations to see how often historically these areas have been, over that closure period. Moving right along, this is Nirakus. So this is a buoy data set. So this is, instead of having modeled output, these are measurements directly from buoys. Let me go to my next Nirakus here. So if you open this up, it'll give you these locations of buoys along the coast of Maine. Not all of them are inshore, but they can give you a good idea, especially of some of those wind and wave conditions. So if you scroll in, if anyone is interested in Casco Bay, buoy 007 is a great buoy to look at. It'll tell you the wind, the wave heights, the air temperature, the wave direction. So it'll give you an idea of, what is going on near your site. You can also look at forecasts here as well. So this might be kind of interesting. This is the measured data for significant wave height. This is what it's going to be during the hurricane. So we're going to be up to 17.5 feet. So that's pretty interesting. It also, if you go up and go to the actual Nirakus website, you can go to climatology. So if you're looking for generic conditions in your area, you can go to, so this is buoy F01 in Penobscot Bay, and you can select several others. You can actually look at what is the historic data. So what is the historic wind speed in Penobscot Bay, and it will give you the daily means, but also ranges of what you are observing, which is pretty great. And so for wind speed, one of the things I like to think about is fetch. So looking at, what are the seasonal directions of wind and how strong is it? Our site, the Darling Marine Center, anything that is coming from the south or southeast, we're actually very well protected from. However, right about now in the fall, the average wind direction changes and comes out of the northwest. And we have a pretty long fetch, almost a mile in that direction. So we actually get fairly significant waves that travel down and directly hit our farm. So it's a good thing to look at, looking at the distance that wind is going to travel over water to get to your site, and think about, looking at the general wind directions. Is it going to be hard to get out to my site in the spring or the fall or the summer? Which directions am I going to be protected from? And so exposure can also help shape your oysters. This is just an example of some data we collected. 2 exposed sites, Hurricane Island and down in Casco Bay, and then 2 sites collected tucked up in that river. And you can see that those exposed sites got more jostling, those bags moved a whole lot more. And so we actually had higher meat weights per shell length at the exposed sites than the sheltered ones. But I'm not going to spend too much time on that because I only have a few minutes left. And I want to talk about environmental data. So this is data beyond, the physical oceanography that actually drives growth. So temperature determines how much these animals are actually using energy, and ideas of food such as chlorophyll, turbidity, or nitrogen for seaweeds determine how much energy they're able to take in. So the balance between these two kind of determine growth. We can get it from 2 ways, from buoys or from satellites. I'm going to talk a little bit about both. But first, I want to try to give like a little bit of an overview and include this slide if anyone is curious about sort of the temperature ranges that we look for species. So this figure on the right here, these are generalized temperature curves for these animals. We've got kelp, mussels, oysters, and scallops. And so these are from models of animal growth. So they aren't, exactly, they're used to predict how these animals will perform under these temperatures. So this scale over here doesn't mean much. It's basically just the effect of this temperature on animal physiology. So at the peak, the animal is performing its best. On either sides of these temperatures, it starts to decline as they experience stress, or since all these animals are invertebrates or seaweeds. They can't warm themselves, so their energy use declines in the cold naturally. So just a little bit of, you can see for oysters, this red line here, these animals range from the Gulf of Mexico up to Canada, so they can experience a wide range of temperatures, and they're very happy in very variable conditions. They can grow intertidally. So we can see that they peak at around 28 degrees, but they are performing quite well, anywhere from 15 to 28. Sea scallops, on the other hand, are evolved in the deeper ocean, where temperature is much more stable. So you can see that they have a much narrower temperature range, ideally between 10 and 15 degrees Celsius. So it's good to keep in mind. Food is another complex question. How much food does food matter? We have some examples on here. We have for the oyster suitability index. This was created by Jordan Snyder in 2017. And so looking at chlorophyll, ideal conditions, she determined were between 10 and 3 micrograms per liter, where there's enough food, but not too much to actually slow down feeding. Moderate conditions are anything below 3 micrograms per liter and above 1. And then poor conditions are below 1 microgram per liter, where there may not be enough food, or above 10. And this is just a regression between growth rate and chlorophyll at scallops at our site. So we can see between 0 and 3, the impact of chlorophyll on growth increases, but then kind of bottoms out where you're not getting much more growth with more food. And so another thing to keep in mind is that food is delivery times actually what is there. So if you're in an area with low flow and low food, your animals can actually deplete that concentration. But in high flow areas, there's actually refreshing that food. This is taking a little bit longer than I thought, than I practiced. So I'm going to kind of just go over these next two options pretty quickly. So the Maine Lobo buoys are buoys that our lab deployed from 2015 to now. They're kind of ending their lifespan. We're looking to replace them, but there's lots of good historical data on there as well. If you go to them right here, you can select the buoy that you want to look at, a wide range of temperatures, current speed, temperature, salinity, nitrate, and also, the dates that you want to look at can be specified over here. And you can use these to compare sites, where we can see the upper Damariscotta River in June of 2021 was a lot warmer than the lower Damariscotta, where our lab is right now. You can also look at food between sites as well, which is pretty great. And I'm going to skip right to the next site that monitors food information as well, which is Friends of Casco Bay. So if anyone is looking for a farm site in Casco Bay, this is a great website to go to, Friends of Casco Bay. They have continuous monitoring stations where they actually deploy these sensors underwater and report that data out here. So you can go to a site, say looking off Yarmouth, and you can see not only the historic averages, but how each year compares. So you have temperature, salinity, you can see these spikes where there's rain events, and food as well. So you can get lost spending time in here. And one thing I want to point out is comparing the Lobo data to the Friends of Casco Bay data. You can see that these values are quite high. But when you actually plot data from the different sensors that are actually measuring chlorophyll, this is the Friends of Casco Bay sensors, the SON chlorophyll. That's on the x-axis here. And on the right, we have the Lobo chlorophyll. So these are different sensors. They measure it, they're calibrated slightly different. So you can see when the SONs are reading about 4, the Lobo is reading about 2, which is about half the concentration. So this is something that you want to be keep into mind, that these are not exact measures of how much phytoplankton's in the water, they're proxies. And so comparing data between the Lobo site and the Friends of Casco Bay might not be the best option, but comparing within sites in each is a good way to get at different food levels. And so the last thing I want to talk about is satellite data. And so these, we have been working with some high resolution satellites, Landsat 8 and Sentinel-2. They can get data on the scale of 20 to 30 meters. So we can actually get inside these narrow estuaries and close to shore to get data. And so I just want to give a little breakdown on how reliable each parameter we can get from the satellite is. The first one is temperature. We can get sea surface temperature at a resolution of 100 meters. We can see here the buoy temperature is on the bottom and the calculated satellite temperature is here on the left. And that's really, really great. That relationship is really, really strong. When we look at turbidity, we see that the relationship is still pretty good. This is Sentinel-2 here. We can see that one of the important metrics that we look at is MAP, mean absolute percentage error. So what is the percent difference between the observed and the measured? So satellite here on the left and measured buoy SPM on the bottom. And we can see a 35% error is actually pretty good. Chlorophyll. I wish this was a lot better, and it's something we're working on. Right now, there is a general relationship. However, it is a lot messy. You can see our percentage error is about 91% for chlorophyll. So it's a lot harder to get very accurate chlorophyll data from these satellites. These have been, some of this data, early work by Jordan Snyder, has been condensed into oyster suitability indexes. And these are hosted on this website here. And I'm going to give you a quick tour of that because it can be a little bit difficult to find. So when you follow that link, it's going to take you to this University of Maine high-resolution satellite image page. And it's going to go to a little bit about section. So if you want to find those oyster suitability indexes that basically weigh temperature, food, and turbidity to find that like generalized ideal sites, you click on old data, which is a very strange thing. And then you scroll down to OSI data, oyster suitability index. And then you can go to an area that you're interested in, like the mid-coast, and you can see these averages. This is a July average of a few images with that oyster suitability index calculated. So 1 is an ideal oyster site, and 0 is a poor site. So you can see August averages, September averages, and you can go down here if you want to check, what is actually put into account there. And then since I only have 5 minutes, I'm not sure I'm going to get to actually showing people, actually getting data for people off our last tool, but it's one that I want to highlight. Since we are very confident in that satellite temperature data, I wanted to demonstrate this new tool that we're still working on, but it is a portal to actually see some time series of that Landsat 8 sea surface temperature data. So if you go to this link, last one that I have loaded, it'll load. Basically what we're seeing here is a composite of all the satellite data from 2014 to 2023. The most recent data was taken on August 27th, 2023. And this is sort of just an average. The set scale always goes from 6 to 15. So it can be a little, if temperatures are above 15, it's just going to show that. It takes a little bit to load, so I've already got some preset zoom ins for you. So if you actually click on a location, it'll generate a time series for you over on the left here at each location. So it just takes an average of a few pixels around the point that you click on. And then if you scroll over here, you can actually see when that satellite came over and when we were actually able to get an image. And so this satellite comes every 16 days. And if it's cloudy, we don't get an image. So it's very helpful to actually use this time series. If you click on this button right here, it'll open it up in a larger folder, and you can actually download this CSV. And the last thing I want to show you is actually how to generate a climatology from this data. Eventually, we'll have this included in the tool, but for right now, we don't. So if you download this CSV, it's going to say EE chart, and you can put it on a folder on your desktop. Landsat downloads, I already have one downloaded. We're going to save it there, replace. So if you want access to these Excel sheets or want help building one, say in Google Sheets, if you don't have Excel, please reach out to me, and I'd be happy to work with you. So if you go to that download, when you open up that chart, you're going to get this file. This is the date that the satellite passed over, and STB10 is just basically your sea surface temperature in degrees Celsius. And all these empty points are where the satellite actually passed over, but we're just not getting any data because there was clouds. So if you want to generate a climatology, what we do is select that data. And we can put it into another spreadsheet here. Basically copy and paste it in there. And what this does is it calculates the day of year. Okay, so it calculates the day of year. You guys have to do some fiddling with it, but I'm happy to help people walk through. Calculates the day of year. So each time the satellite comes over, it matches it up with the actual day of year. So day 200 is the middle of August. We have our warm temperatures, but I can show you more of a generalized climatology, and we'll fit this little curve to it. So I can show you one that maybe is a little bit cleaner. I'm a little kind of rushing right now. Here was the original climatology that I generated from another location. And so you'll see some anomalies where, say, there's negative temperatures. This is, again, because it's, from the satellite. And you are going to get some of these if, we don't think the ocean temperature is -3. You can go through and sort of clean these data sets a little bit. And so I kind of rushed into the end, but I still have a few minutes for questions. If anyone is curious, my email is up there right now. Please reach out to me. I'm happy to talk more about any of these data sources, or if you want some more information on any of them, please let me know.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom. Just for anyone who's still around, we are going to be sending out a recording of this presentation, and also we will email Tom's contact information to you, so you can reach out to him directly, which should help people connect with you more easily. But that was super interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. I always learn a lot from listening to these. It was really cool. Just a reminder to everybody who's on the call, our next webinar is, let me see, October 20th. It's a Friday, from the classic 12 to 1 p.m. And it will be Amanda Mosier talking about her farmer-to-farmer exchange in Mexico. And we hope to see you there. We would be very excited to have more folks coming. And another note that we are still accepting farmer-to-farmer exchange applications for funding. So please reach out to us if you're interested in that. And it's 1 o'clock. So there you go.